Hello, and welcome back to Friday Vinyl Club, where every day feels like a Friday and every album tells a story. I'm Jamie, and each episode I invite a guest to bring along a special record, an album that didn't just play in their life, but shaped it. This isn't about chart positions or critical reviews, it's about personal soundtracks, the records that stay with us long after the needle lifts. This episode, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Ray Harris. Ray is an incredible musician, keyboardist, and songwriter whose music captures a phenomenal blend of dance floor jazz, Latin rhythms, and deep groove funk. He has a rare gift for taking intricate songs and turning them into sweeping cinematic tracks that completely take over a room. And for this episode of Friday Vinyl Club, Ray has chosen Strange Days by The Doors. It's a record that captures the dark, theatrical underbelly of the late 60s counterculture, and fundamentally is noted for transforming the sound of rock and roll. But before we dive into the album and why this record matters to Ray, let's rewind a little. Ray, welcome to Friday Vinyl Club. How are you feeling today?
Jamie, thanks so much for having me on the pod. I'm feeling good. I'm probably the same as you, pretty hot down in Leeds, and it's pretty hot up here in Glasgow as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely melting down here. But we shouldn't complain, right? We shouldn't complain about these little heat waves. People pay a lot of money to go abroad and enjoy sunshine like this. Ray, I'm so glad to have you here. Your music first came onto my landscape when I saw a post from one of our followers on Instagram in the Instagram vinyl community, someone called Spinning with Quinn. And I've been listening ever since, and it's pretty clear that I've been missing out. What is it about Glasgow that creates such talent and talented artists? And for full disclosure, one of my musical heroes is Justin Curry from Delamitri.
I think that Glasgow and Scotland in general has always produced really good music. You know, Justin Curry and Delamitri are absolute legends. And, you know, you've got a lot of bands from that era as well, that kind of sort of 80s, 90s, you know, Delamitri, Deacon Blue. And then even moving into the 2000s, Franz Ferdinand, Belle and Sebastian, Texas. There's so many great bands and great musicians that have came from Glasgow. I think the thing with Glasgow is that it's got a very sort of industrial side to the city, but it's also got a very creative side. A lot of the city is based on art, with the multitude of museums that we have as well, art galleries, and Charles Rennie Mackintosh, the influence of him in the city as well. So I think that sort of the industrial side of Glasgow, but the artistic side have always blended together.
Yeah, whenever I've visited, you know, when I've been up to see bands up there, there's been an incredible vibe around the city. There's a buzz. And I would say it's second only to Manchester when it comes to feeling that buzz from an artistic and a music vibe. On this podcast, Ray, we love to start at the very, very beginning. So what are your early music memories, and what did music sound like in the house when you were growing up?
Music was always part of my life from a very, very early age. And I remember that I was always fascinated by my dad's record collection. I would spend hours going through all these fantastic 12-inch vinyls, and it was always the front covers that caught my attention straight away. And one of the first records I seen was John Lennon's Double Fantasy album. And I remember looking at the front cover and totally, mesmerised by it. And then even looking at like 12-inch vinyls, like my dad had so many 12-inch vinyls, you know, Shaka Khan, and then The Doors and Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, all this real fantastic record collection. And I always felt that music was always part of my life, on an emotional connection, because music made me happy. It also made me sad. It made me thoughtful. There were certain songs that I could create memories to as well. And one of the first songs that really caught me emotionally was John Lennon's Woman. You know, I could really feel the heartfelt lyrics and the sound of it, you know, that warmth, that real analog warmth. Even since a young age, that music, it was always very important to me. But I actually didn't start playing music until I was about 14, and I kind of got into it accidentally. Because at school, I wasn't really good at anything at school. It wasn't that I wasn't good at anything, I just didn't have the concentration to sit at peace for 2 minutes. And then when I got introduced to music about 14, I, I felt that I'd arrived basically. And I found it, not from an egotistical point of view here, but I actually found it quite easy to learn, and I picked it up very, very quickly. And basically, I started teaching myself how to play the piano when I was about 14, 15. And then that's where I started listening to a lot of classical music like Chopin. I'm still a massive Chopin fan today. And I started listening to all different genres of music, from jazz to soul to funk to pop music to, the Beatles to the Doors to classical music. And that's when I started listening to music and tried to replicate that by playing it on the piano.
So you had a pretty eclectic sound growing up, not just around the house then. So you played your dad's vinyl records. You were allowed to physically get involved with them rather than, I know in my house, my dad's record collection was like, you can look, but you don't touch. So he was pretty precious about these things. But was it quite open then in your house for that type of thing?
Yeah, so when I went to visit my dad, I always remember sitting in his front room and he had all these records lined up, and I'd just take one out and I'd look at it and I'd read the back, and I was so like intrigued by where it was recorded and what all these different words meant, sound engineer. But I was very young then though, I was maybe like 7 or 8 year old then. And I always remember the smell of vinyl as well. There's that kind of sort of dusty smell from it. Um, and then when you put the record on, you heard the crackle, and and you were really excited to hear what you're going to hear next. So yeah, that was my kind of earliest memory of vinyl, and it was something that I actually found great pleasure in, was finding out about other artists as well. And I remember one album sleeve that totally blew me away. Actually, was the band Men at Work, Australian band. And it was all these guys like builders when they've got like their shovels out in the street and stuff like that. And they had the sign up as if it was roadworks. And I went, wow, that's amazing. And it was really, really interesting. And then I remember, looking at Doors albums, Strange Days, I was totally intrigued by the front cover. I was like, what's this all about? And then you turned it in the back and there was a lady with a dress on and a person holding a tambourine as if they're begging. It was really, really totally intrigued by the artwork. It was fascinating, yeah.
And then obviously picking up the piano at 14 must have been a bit of a revelation for you. I mean, was it only at school that you were able to play, or did you have access to one in the house?
So there was no piano in the house when I was growing up, no. But basically when my mum realised that that's what I wanted to do was play piano and do music, we hunted high and low for a piano. We actually got gifted a piano from a family member, and I actually painted it with Dulux white paint. And I remember that as soon as I got home from school, that's the only thing I do was just sit at the piano. And I taught myself how to play blues by listening to old blues records, listening to Memphis Slim, Dr. John, all these guys, listening to real kind of amazing blues piano players. And then I was very fortunate that somebody at school recommended that I go and get jazz and blues lessons. But I was never a big jazz fan, if I'm honest with you. And then I learned how to play jazz and blues from a fantastic teacher. And then I got accepted to go and study music at Strathclyde University in Glasgow. I was only about 15 at the time, so it was a course. It was a diploma in music, and it was called the National Jazz Institute. So I studied there for about 4 years.
Fantastic. My boy Ollie got into piano when he was around the same age, and he's self-taught. And he'll do it for mindfulness. He'll do it for us, rather than taking it any further than that. Once you started to find your way around the keys and start finding your own taste, did you start to gravitate towards a certain sound?
Well, basically, my brother, he was quite a well-known DJ, actually, the kind of 90s and the 2000s. And I remember he had a huge record collection, massive, you're talking tens of thousands of records. And a lot of those records were kind of soul 70s records, and a lot of stuff in the kind of sort of Studio 54 era, the sort of Tom Moulton era, the kind of sort of Philly sound as well, that kind of beautiful orchestral disco music, which I still love to this day. And I started really listening to that stuff. And then, I started getting into kind of more sort of acid jazz music. And then I'm doing a rabbit hole with that. So you get into guys like, Lonnie Liston Smith and Roy Ayers and all that kind of stuff. But my main love of music has always been songs. I can appreciate fantastic jazz music. I can appreciate fantastic soul funk. It's incredible. But for me, I've always been drawn to songs and how a song makes you feel, particularly with lyrics as well, the power of lyrics. Thinking about it now, I went through a stage where I was really loved David Bowie, I still do it this day, Lou Reed, Velvet Underground, and then sort of psych 60s stuff. That's kind of where my soul is, sort of psych 60s, and then mod music as well. I was a big mod in my early teens and into my 20s. So I've always been surrounded by all different types of genres. But I do feel in the last couple of years, it's only that I've really found my true sound, or my own personal sound. I feel, right, that's what I want to do.
And when you were growing up and being exposed to those tastes, and I assume your brother was sharing some of that, were you getting influences from people at school and friends, and sharing music that way, or were you very individual? And once you'd found what I'd kind of say is an old soul taste, you knew what you wanted to do and you knew what to listen to.
I never, listened to the same music as my friends. Growing up, majority of my friends kind of liked indie music, Oasis, Stone Roses, Happy Mondays, amazing bands, but I just never kind of felt connected to it. I wouldn't listen to an Oasis record when I was 16, no. But I could listen to Abbey Road, for example, and I felt more of a connection with that. And I've always felt I was born in the wrong era, actually,
Yeah.
But I remember, like, my friends would be going to see these gigs and I wouldn't go because I'm like, well, it's not really my type of music. I actually really liked Kula Shaker. I loved that sound, how they mixed rock with, the Hammond organ, with it, with also Indian influences as well. So I really, really loved Kula Shaker when I was growing up as well.
I'm going back in the recesses of my mind now. Cooler Shaker, did they do a cover of Hush? Was Hush
Yes, that's right.
Cooler Shaker? That's the band I'm
Yep,
thinking of.
that's right.
Given what you said about your friends and they had very different music tastes, did you end up ploughing your own furrow when it come to gigs? What's your earliest memories there?
Well, the thing is with gigs is that I was always really interested in a gig more of as like a show. I've always been a huge Beatles fan, so I've been to see Paul McCartney a few times, and I went to see Andrew Bocelli, so I've got a complete range of live gigs that I've been to. But no, with live gigs, it was more of I would end up going with my music friends, because kind of when I started going to gigs, I was hanging about with a lot more musicians than, like my friends out with music or my family. So a lot of the gigs that I would go to, one of the best gigs I've ever been at was Dave Brubeck. And I went with my family to that. I was a huge Dave Brubeck fan, and I got to see him not long before he died, which was a real honour. The first gig I actually ever went to was Jools Holland at the
Really?
Glasgow, at the Glasgow Fruit Market, because he was a boogie woogie piano player, and there wasn't many of those guys doing live gigs. So I went with a friend from school, and I was about 14, 15 at the time, and I waited to the very end to meet him. I stood at the front and waited, and then asked one of the crew guys if he could go out and say hello, and he came out and said hello. But this is before, mobile phones. I think with a camera, it was just, how you doing, and sign there, So that was a fantastic experience.
Some would say the good old days. So, can you remember any performances you saw live where they fundamentally got under your skin to the point of you thinking, I can do this? I want to do this? Or was that something that was just like a natural transition?
I think it was more of a natural transition. I don't think I've been to a gig, Jamie, and I've went, that's what I want to do, or I want to be like them. I've actually never had that thing of, I want to do what they do. I think when it comes to doing live gigs, it happened very naturally. Because actually, I've had a few breaks from music over the years. When I was in my early 20s, I stopped gigging for about 4 years, and I went back to doing gigs. But what I would do is a lot of bars and clubs in Glasgow, and what I'd do is I'd maybe do 90% covers and 10% of my own songs. Then after a couple of months, it became 70% covers, 30% of my own, and so forth. I started really building this nice following in Glasgow. And then that's when I started getting booked for gigs. I had a good following, and this is when things started to kind of realise it. I think I realised, right, okay, I can do this. I can do bigger gigs. I can do bigger shows, and I can start introducing other musicians as well. And I've done a lot of session work as well over the years, and worked with various other musicians and DJs and producers. But I always felt I wanted to do my own music. I always felt more content and more fulfilled to do my own music. And then I started getting booked for festivals up here. And then before long, I started getting booked out with Glasgow, Edinburgh, Manchester, Leeds, London. And then I started getting booked for festivals. And then I started to write my own music and focus more on that. So it's been quite an interesting journey.
It's one thing writing your own songs in private and then exposing them to smaller audiences. How does that then transition from there into more of a professional industry? And then see you going on a journey that, playing with icons like James Brown or touring with legends like the Average White Band and things. What's that little inflection point? How did that happen?
Well, James Brown support, that came about, that was 2008. And basically what had happened is that I built up quite a good foundation, if you want to say. And as I mentioned there, I was starting to get booked for bigger gigs and bigger shows, and my audience started to expand as well. And then I realised I should do a record and start recording. So I started recording my own songs. And then I started getting a lot of interest from record labels. And I had some interest from some majors. A couple of major labels had got in touch, and one in particular, they were showing loads of interest. I'd been down to London to meet them a few times, and a few of their A&R guys came to a few gigs. It was an exciting time, and it was just this kind of circle going round and round and round, the same chat. And I became very frustrated by that because you never got real clear answers. So what I did is that when I realised that the major labels weren't biting, I started looking to other labels, and there was a label down in London who said that I should speak to a label in Japan. And I spoke to this label in Japan, and they absolutely loved the record, and they said they would take it. And then that's when I made the decision to go and focus my music on more independence. And I felt much more content with that. I would email them, they'd email me back straight away. This is the start of email, by the way. But you'd email them, they'd email you back straight away. You'd phone them, they'd phone you back straight away. They had great promo lined up. I've been out to Japan to meet them. Did some live shows out in Japan, and it was really, really good. So when the record went out in Japan, it did really well. And if somebody was talking about this recently, actually, but I've got a playlist sheet from Tokyo FM, and it's like Jamie Cullum, Paul McCartney, and then it says Ray Harris underneath it. It's quite strange.
Oh, fantastic.
It's quite strange.
Surreal.
Yeah. And the record went out 12-inch vinyl, and there was a lot of real good interest. And then it's got a lot of, the 12-inch vinyl was getting played in a lot of clubs, and then I was getting real good plays. And then I got a phone call one day from a promoter saying, would you like to support James Brown? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to do that. Sounds great. So went and did the James Brown support, and it went fantastic. And then I think once I'd done the James Brown support, it's not that I was wanting people to take me seriously. I just think that things naturally progressed into more, all right, okay, you've made a record, you've done the James Brown support, what's next? And then I got the Average White Band support. And then, I was starting to get a lot of phone calls from different promoters. That's when I got the Nile Rodgers and Chic support, Sister Sledge. So I've been very, very honoured to open up for these legends. And it is quite strange when you've done your sound check, and then Nile Rodgers and Chic going to do their sound check, and you're going, wait a minute, I remember listening to that when I was 12-year-old. I remember listening to that song, and they're standing in front of you doing the sound check, and it's fantastic. What it's been an amazing journey. There's been a lot of ups, there's been a lot of downs. I'm not going to say that it's been a a pleasant journey. There's been a lot of roller coasters. There's been a lot of, like everybody in music, there's been a lot of heartache. There's been a lot of rejection. There's been a lot of empty promises. Loads and loads of stuff's happened over the years, but I just don't let it affect me. That's the truth. I just do my thing and I'm quite happy. But after that, the record went out in Indonesia. A label in Indonesia got in touch and they said that they'd heard the album in Japan. They loved it. They would like to license it. And they're like that. Listen, there's a demand here for some gigs. We'd love to have you out. So I was out in Jakarta, did some shows out in Jakarta, and then managed to do a tour going from Japan to Indonesia to Malaysia, then up to China, and did a whole run of shows at festivals and doing gigs. It was incredible. And then I was back out in Jakarta again. I was back out there and doing some festivals. It was a fantastic experience.
And are these the festivals in Asia that I read that you were getting like 20,000 people to these gigs you were playing, and you were being mobbed by people over there, and selfies and photographs and autographs and everything? How does that feel from the journey that you're describing to end up in that environment? It must be a mixture of a pinch yourself moment, but also surreal.
Well, the thing is, in Glasgow, I wasn't like doing absolutely massive gigs. I was doing good gigs, but I wasn't doing like, selling out the Barrowlands myself or anything like that. No. I was doing decent capacity venues. But when I went over to Indonesia, it was pretty full on. Those people there had their CD and, it's written in Bahasa, the language of Indonesia, and they're wanting it signed. And there was people turning up to the sound check. There was people, come to the hotel to meet us. And it was fantastic. And I actually got interviewed by Rolling Stone magazine there, which was, again, another fantastic experience. The last gig that I did in Indonesia, there was 26,000 people there. Yeah.
Wow. What was it like looking out from stage to that sort of crowd? Is that intimidating, or is it that big that it just becomes a bit of a blur?
It becomes a blur, because I remember I was on at 11 o'clock at night, and, we're talking about the heat in the UK at the moment. The heat in Indonesia, I have never felt anything like this in my life. And it was just, you walk out and the noise, it was incredible, and the people were just so lovely as well. And some of the nicest people I've met in my life, and they're just so passionate about music, and they're so grateful that you've went to their country and performed.
So you said you were doing gigs in Glasgow at the time, but obviously nothing on the scale of that. So you could pretty much walk around your home city quite anonymously then. I know I've read Justin Curry from Delamitri talk about this. He says Glasgow is one of those cities that just gives you a bit of a gift in a way, that it keeps you grounded. So he can walk around Glasgow and he very seldom gets interrupted. He sees it as a bit of a gift, I think. Is that something you see in the same way, or is that something, different for you?
Well, I go to a coffee shop with a very good friend of mine who's a very well-known musician, and we actually talk about it. You sit in Byers Road in Glasgow and you can, Justin Curry could walk down, the guys from Bell and Sebastian could walk down, and, nobody bothers with them, and I think that's, which is quite nice in Glasgow.
Let's talk about your sound. When you were mapping out how you wanted to sound, what was your biggest inspiration in your artistic direction?
I think the sound has developed over the years. If I listen to my very first album, it's very predominantly kind of acid jazz, soul. Then moving into the second album, it's kind of more remix, kind of associate more with sort of jazz dance stuff. But then it's like this kind of third and fourth albums are starting to become very, very experimental and trying to really find a sound. And then the previous album, which I'd done before Prelude, was an album called Propaganda. And that was kind of very, a lot of psych influences, but then a lot of songwriting influences as well. Whereas the new album, I've completely stuck to what I want to do. I've went, this is what I want to do. This is how I hear the songs. I want to focus on my feelings, basically. Let's be honest here. That's what an album is. It's a story. It's a book. It's a book of your soul, basically. Before you know it, I had 10 songs worthy of an album. And then that's when I went and decided getting them all together.
And do you have a discipline when it comes to songwriting, or is it more sort of lightning hits you when you're trying to create a song? For example, one of my other heroes is Nick Cave of
Oh,
the Bad Seeds.
amazing.
And he talks about every day he goes into his writing room, his writing office, and he will sit and he will force himself to write lyrics. Another artist that I like, it's like, oh, I was half asleep and something just came to me in the middle of the night and I had to get up and capture it. Where do you sit on that spectrum for being a songwriter?
So I would love to have the Nick Cave approach, having a set time and that's it. I've tried that and it doesn't work for me. When it comes to songwriting, it's what I see, what I hear, what I feel. And basically, it used to be that I'd have notebooks and I'd write everything down. Whereas now I just use my phone, go into notes and type ideas in my head. It could be something that I see. It could be somebody I see. It could be something that I'm feeling at that moment in time. So, for example, in the new album Prelude, there's a song called London. And I think I wrote that in half a day, the whole song, just because of what I was experiencing that day when I was in London. And basically, I'm either in the zone or I'm not in the zone. I wasn't in the zone for about 7 years. And, people talk about regrets in life. And that's one regret that I do have, is that I took such a long sabbatical. It wasn't through choice. But I just wish that I didn't have the 7 years of that gap, because I have kind of had to restart my career again.
We'll come back to Prelude a little bit later on, and we'll talk about some of the tracks in a little bit more detail. When you write something, do you know straight away that it's going to be special?
I think when I'm songwriting, it's got a lot to do with my personality as well. I'm kind of all or nothing kind of type person. In fact, one of my friends was saying that to me last night. You're very black and white, which is a good thing, and I'm like that with songwriting as well. I don't sit back and wait for it. If I'm in the zone, I'm in the zone. But what sometimes what I'll do is I'll sit down, I'll say, oh, that's a nice verse. Oh, that's a nice chorus. But then, the next day I go, oh, that verse actually might work better on that chorus. It's a bit like a jigsaw. I've got loads of pieces, and then I'll piece them all together. Sometimes I've got to change keys. Sometimes I've got to move things around. But then I start to kind of get into a groove, if you want to say.
Once you've got that and you've written a song and you've let it go out into the world, and then you hear it played like to millions of listeners on a radio. I read that you've been championed by Mark Lamar on Radio 2 and Craig Charles on BBC Radio 6. How does that feel when you hear your final song coming out of the radio and it's been respected to the level that you've been played to millions of listeners? How does that feel?
I remember the first time I heard one of my songs in Radio Scotland, and I was like, wow, it sounds really different. It sounds bigger. It sounds more full. But basically, yeah, it's a surreal feeling. I've actually got a notification thing on my phone when one of my tracks is played. It came up the other day and saying, oh, your song is live on blah, blah, blah radio. And I went, oh, no way, I'll have a listen. And it was quite nice to sit and go, that sounds good. That sounds like that sounds quite good. That was good. Give yourself a kind of pat in the back, But yeah, the first couple of times it was a bit surreal, but now it's more of a kind of, it's good that it's getting played, And this last record that I've done is the only record that I've ever actually been truly happy with, and that's the truth.
Well, I've been listening to it, and we're going to talk about some tracks soon. And I can say two things. Firstly, it's outstanding. And secondly, my wife Emma loves it. And that is the hallmark of a great album. So
Thank you.
There you go. Let's start thinking about the album you've brought to Friday Vinyl Club today, The Doors' Strange Days. They came into your life pretty early on by the sound of it through your dad's record collection. Did you have any other personal connection to the Doors? Some of the films that were brought out over the years. What's the fascination there from a Doors perspective?
Well, basically, when I learnt piano, I learnt to play boogie woogie and play jazz and soul and whatnot. And basically, I started listening to a lot of music where keyboard players were starting to really influence me. And I used to be a huge fan of the Animals. I absolutely loved the Animals. I loved that Vox Continental sound, the kind of the really harsh organ sound. And I was like, I love that. It's such a great sound. And then, as I said, the Beach Boys, and they had that sound as well, a lot of their early stuff. And then the Monkees as well, they used the Vox as well. And then I came across the Doors and I was absolutely blown away by their sound. And the thing is, what I liked about the Doors so much was the mixture of genres. They were totally different from anything that I'd ever heard before. I'm a huge Beatles fan, massive Beatles fan, but there was something about the Strange Days record, which, a bit like Sergeant Pepper's, it totally caught my attention and basically caught my soul, if I'm honest with you. The sound was incredible. And I think what I like so much about Strange Days is that it's the mixture of psychedelia. The first song, Strange Days, is like far out psychedelia, but then, a couple of tunes in, you've got Love Me Two Times, which is a standard 12-bar blues with a slight change in the middle. But then you kind of look at the B side, you've got an iconic song, People Are Strange, which was actually covered by Echo and the Bunnymen, and actually did some gigs with them years ago as well.
Really?
And yeah, that was early 2000s maybe.
The Echo and the Bunnymen cover is the one that introduced me to the Doors, because that was on the film Lost Boys.
That's right.
And I went down the sort of Doors rabbit hole through that entry point. That's when it came into my life. So it's interesting that you toured with them. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so I did some shows with E. McCulloch, and then even with the Doors Strange Days, there's the second last track, I Can't See Your Face in My Mind. It's like, it's quite just a nice progression at the start, but then there's the mid-section's kind of more jazzier, but then the last song, when the music's over, it's like, I'd never heard anything like that in my life. It was like a story. It was like, what's going on here? And then actually, because I was such a huge Doors fan, what I started doing was at live gigs, as my encore, I would do the Doors, Riders in the Storm. And then I've always loved the Doors, but that album to me is just, it's incredible. The production on it is incredible. Even the instrumentation, I think there's a marimba on I Can't See Your Face. There's a marimba part, there is, and then there's actually some samples used as well, which is good. I mean, you're going back to 67 it was released?
1967, yeah, you're absolutely right. It was their second album.
Second album, that's right.
And it quickly followed their debut. There was only 9 months between the debut album and this follow-up album. And it was a much darker sound and a much more experimental sound that they pulled out. Do you look at it now through a musician's eyes and think, how the hell did they do that? Or is this still something that you discovered and you look at it through the eyes of your younger self when you were listening to it as just as music?
The thing is, Jamie, is that you listen to records now and you don't realise they're actually 15, 60 years old. That's what I can't get my head around. You go, wait a minute, this was written 60 years ago. This was before we had Pro Tools and Logic Pro and samplers and and Auto-Tune. This is like 4 guys in a room with a couple of mics. And that's what I think completely has blown me away. It's like, well, how would you think that way? How would you think about, right, what we're going to do is we're going to have this sound, and what we're going to do is we're going to mic up, the drums this way. We're going to, use this keyboard. We're going to use this. We're going to double track the bass lines. It's incredible. Because obviously the Doors, Manzarek played the keyboard bass. He played the keyboard bass, but he also doubled up with a bass player, so to get a really, really thick bass sound. And I was actually really fortunate. I got to meet Manzarek and Robby Krieger from the Doors.
Really?
Yes, I got to meet them.
How did that happen?
They were playing in Glasgow, and somebody in Glasgow arranged for me to go and meet them, because I'd actually done a version of Riders in the Storm live, and it went out in Japan, and it was on the record. So basically, somebody I knew in music got in touch with the promoter, and I was very fortunate. I got to meet Manzarek and Krieger, and that was a surreal experience, and it was two of my heroes. In fact, Robby Krieger's still out doing gigs. I think it was his birthday the other day. Something popped up on Facebook. It was his birthday and he was out doing gigs. He's still gigging at 83 or whatever he is, Fantastic.
Were they, as you would have hoped they might be when you meet them?
I think you meet anybody, you've only seen them on TV, so it's very strange when you meet somebody and you go, geez, that is a real person. I was like that when I met James Brown as well. It's like, well, that's him there. There he is. It's the Godfather of Soul himself. So it's quite a surreal experience. But listen, they're human beings at the end of the day, same as everybody else. I don't try to, put anybody in a pedestal, and I certainly wouldn't want them to put me up on a pedestal either. We're all human beings at the same, we're all at the same level. That's the way I look at it anyway.
Yeah, that's a very grounded, humble way of looking at things. Thinking about the album, it's incredibly rich from a lyrical perspective. And as you're a lyrics guy, are there any specific lyrics that jump out to you that you've carried with you?
Well, I think one of the great lyrics is "People are strange. People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone." It's these are really, really descriptive lyrics which really set a picture. And also you've got when the music's over, from a lyrical point of view, it's genius. When the music's over, turn off the lights. I think that's why I was so attracted to this album, because it was something I'd never heard before. Every song that I'd heard before was about, love and happiness and joyous and free and everybody's happy. Whereas when you listen to this album, it's in a complete different zone. Lyrically, there's a lot of real things that connected with me at that time. When I was kind of in my late teens, early 20s, I was like, wow, what does this stuff mean? And then you start really looking at the lyrics and then you put the music to it. It was incredible.
I've been listening to this and reacquainting myself with this album over the last few days. When you suggested that this was the one you bring to Friday Vinyl Club, When the Music's Over is one that I gravitate towards as well. But I was really fascinated listening to it back, and I don't know whether I've underappreciated this particular spoken poem, but it leapt out at me, the Horse Latitudes. The way that Morrison growls and snarls his way through that. But then there's that transition to Moonlight Drive. As a songwriter and somebody who's putting records together, does a lot of thought go into that sort of transition as to what comes next, how the tracks lay and rub against each other?
Well, when I lay out my tracks, there's something which is very important. It's got to be a flow. It's got to be a story. And another thing as well is for me anyway, what I try not to do is have a song on the same key. So let's say I write a song in E flat. I don't want my next track being E flat because I don't want it to sound too of the same. Yeah. So for me, from a writer's point of view, it's got to be a story. But there's a few things that I like to do, though, as I said, with the keys. I've got to make sure keys are not clashing. It's got to flow. It's got to have a natural flow. And it's quite good that you mentioned that.
So do you think the Doors intentionally put a few sonic whiplashes in there?
I think what I like about this album and what the Doors were intending to do was basically to write what they wanted to write. They weren't writing pop love songs or, that kind of Californian kind of 3-minute pop songs. And no, they didn't do that. They wrote songs which they wanted to write and what their emotions and what their thought process was. And I think that's why I totally connected with this album. The first time I heard it, I went, wow, they're writing songs that they want to write. They're writing lyrics and they don't care what they're about. They're talking about feelings. They're talking about, like Love Me Two Times. It's a 12-bar blues, but with an incredible change in the middle. And it's like, I think there's just such a connection with the lyrics as well and the music. And I think that's why I love this album so much, that it's so unique. That's what it is. It's unique. Nobody done this. In the kind of psych era, there is a lot of great psych bands, but this album is a mixture of psych. It's a mixture of rock. It's a mixture of blues. There's kind of jazz influences. There's all different types of genres, and I think that's why I really connected with it.
This album's travelled with you through a lot of chapters of your life. Has any of the tracks shifted meaning for you over the years, in a way that maybe when you first heard it, maybe you didn't connect with a track as much, but now when you look back on it, it maybe has a different meaning? Or have you got any specific memories attached to any of these songs?
I think the thing is about if you take the song Love Me Two Times, as I said there, it's a sort of traditional 12 bar blues, but it's the midsection, the turnaround. It's not a standard blues progression. It's not. Um, and that really stood out to me that, wow, that's amazing. That was a 12 bar blues, but they put that in the middle. And as I said, you're going back 60 years. So eh, I think that always kind of stuck with me, that they were doing something different. But even lyrically, I think when you look at the lyrics, which really, they make you think, I can't see your face in my mind. Carnival dogs consume the lines. I mean, what does that actually mean? But it makes you think. But then you have kind of more simplistic lyrics towards the end, don't cry, I won't need your picture until we say goodbye. Really, really heartfelt love. But then, in the previous verse, they're talking about insanity horses, adores the sky, and you're like, well, what does that mean? So I think there's a lot of real thought in the lyrics for this album, and a lot of real connection with different genres, but also, a different traditional music, if you want to say. It's not
Mm,
verse, chorus, here's a bridge. No.
no. And there's a lot of poetry in those lyrics. I mean, obviously, we've called out Horse Latitudes, but in most of the songs, there feels like Morrison's putting poetry to music. And some of those lyrics, as you've just recited, are just absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, I think the thing is as well about the lyrics with this album is there's a lot of ad-libbing as well. I don't think this was set in, well, it's my personal opinion, I don't think this was set in stone, right? This is what we're putting in here, right? At this part here, this is what we're going to do. No, I don't think it was. I think there was a lot of ad-libbing and a lot of, because they did a lot of jazz influences as well, there was a lot of improvisation. Um, but, there's a real strong lyric which really sticks out with me is that when the music's over, um, just for the last chorus, it says, when the music is your special friend. And there has been times, Jamie, in my life, and I've went, well, if I didn't have my music, what would I have? And that's the truth, because music has basically kept me sane, if you want to say.
Hmm.
And it's basically been my life. And I think that line there really stands out, when the music is your special friend. And, if I didn't have my piano, didn't have my songs, I don't really know what else I'd have.
It's quite amazing how music plays such a strong role in our lives in that way, doesn't it? Music is there for us for the happy times. It's there for us for the sad times. And I know it's a cliche, but it's such a universal thing that we can all find ourselves gravitating to music as something that's healing, which is absolutely amazing. If you were introducing the Doors to somebody who was a blank slate, is this an album you would say this is a reflection of the Doors, or would you point them somewhere else?
I think the first album, which is self-titled, The Doors, it's a fantastic album. Again, loads and loads of different genres. Morrison Hotel, another fantastic album, more blues focused, and then obviously Ellie Woman, the finale. If I was to introduce somebody at the Doors, I would probably tell them to start at the beginning, start at the very first album, and work their way, because again, it's a journey. It's a journey from psychedelic rock to ended up kind of blues. You look at Ellie Woman, it's just an incredible album as well. But I think that's what I like about the music that I listen to, that they don't set themselves in one type of music. Even the Beatles, you listen to their first album and it's like pop music and it's incredible. And then you listen to the last album and it's just orchestral, cinematic. It's way ahead of its time. It's just, it creates a complete connection. So I think that the music that I like bands and writers who develop their sound.
And the Doors certainly did that. They never stood still, did they? Let's talk about the artwork on the vinyl sleeve, because obviously artwork is so important when you put in an album or a story, as you put it, together. On this one, it's incredibly distinctive. You know, you've got that street scene, you've got those strange faces on there. It's street performers in a New York alleyway. What was your thoughts when you first saw that? What drew you towards it when you were younger, and maybe you seen it in your dad's collection?
I think the first time I seen it, it caught my attention because I was like, is this a circus show? What is this? And then you were trying to find all the detail. Or who's this guy? Oh, right, what's this? What's it, circus performers? Right, is that an acrobat? Right, what's this guy? Oh, there's a musician at the back playing the trumpet. You know what? It really, really caught my attention. And then when you turn the album over, it's like the back of a club. You know, there's somebody standing at the back door of it looks like a club. And then you've got the guy with the tambourines, if he's begging, or is he busking? What's he doing? So there's a real, you know, a real connection with it. It's art. For me, it's art. I think that's what I like about it.
And there's no real obvious over glamorized pose of the heartthrob that he was. Jim on there, is there? I think there's a little flyer on a wall somewhere that talks about the Doors. But really, it feels more a declaration of counterculture identity, I think. But it does make you ask questions around, you know, what is going on here when you look at that cover. Does it throw anything to you, or is it just a doorway that you think they wanted to open up that got people asking those questions?
I think when I look at the artwork now, there's something very, very strange going on. And they're trying to basically say, well, is it strange or is it normal? And that's what I like about it. It's very, very eye-catching, and it's very thought-provoking that you go, what is it these street performers are doing? You know, is that a circus act? Are they just walking around? What is it they're trying to do? But I think that comes down to people are strange. Well, are they strange or are they completely normal? Because I don't think we can, well, particularly in today's world, we don't actually know what normal is. Everybody's so unique in their own way, which is a good thing. And I think that's what that album then was trying to do. It was trying to say, well, if you are a bit different and you are a bit kind of maybe not conform to society, well, you're still normal. And that's what I quite like about it.
And I think that was a pretty big statement to make back in 1967, right? You make that statement today, and with all the education that's been instilled into us over the years, that wasn't necessarily there in 1967. So
Definitely
it was quite an impactful statement. Yeah. All right. Brilliant. Thank you for that, Ray. Now, we always end Friday Vinyl Club podcast with a Friday spin. Usually, I'd ask you for a recommendation to pass to our listeners, something old, new, and rediscovered. But unless you've got a hidden gem, which knowing you through this conversation, Ray, you probably do, I want to hijack completely and really just talk about your incredible solo work. As I said right at the beginning of this podcast, I'm very, very late to the party, but I'm so glad that your music has come into our musical landscape now. And we've been listening to Prelude for the best part of a couple of weeks. Those melodies are insane. Right off the bat, you know, that first song, I Won't Let You Fall, beautifully stripped back piano and vocal before that energetic band kicks in. What's the background of that song? Where did that come from a creative perspective, and how did you shape it into the opening track? Did you always know that was going to be number one on this album?
I always knew this was going to be the first track. That song, I Won't Let You Fall, is about looking at somebody and realising how much emotional pain they're in, and nobody can help them. And you're trying to not let them fall, and you're trying not to let them go down a road of failure and a road of uncertainty, but they've got so much to offer. So, one of the lines, I look at you and sense your desperation. You look at somebody and you go, well, that person needs help, but they can't see the wood from the trees. They don't realise that, there's people there who want to help them. But a lot of the songs, although they're not about a certain individual, a lot of the songs that I kind of look at back at myself as well, as if I'm trying to tell a story. And it's maybe my way of putting across a lot of my feelings, a lot of my emotions, as a songwriter. And I'm not embarrassed to say that, And the other song, Shadows of My City, that's written about Glasgow. I cannot believe what's happened to my city. Over the years, it's basically, it's very sad to see, but it's not the city it was. And I say that, and Shadows of My City, Footsteps in the Rain, and it's to kind of replicate the bleakness which a lot of people are feeling. And I'm really hoping that song can connect with people. And a few people have actually got in touch and they've said, "Oh, was this written about, Manchester?" And I went, "No, it's actually written about Glasgow." And another guy basically says, "Yes, it wasn't written about Belfast, was it?" I went, "No, it was written about Glasgow." And he says, "Well, I can totally connect with it." And I think it's just the way that we're all feeling at the moment. We kind of feel this kind of, the world's not the best place at the moment. It's not been for well, in my opinion, since COVID. I think that COVID has got a lot to answer for. And I think that when I wrote this album, it was after COVID, it was after the lockdown, it was after the changes in the world, the political unrest, the pain and suffering across the world. And I was like, yeah, I can't deal with this. I'm going to get back into writing. So even with the Shadows of My City, in the second verse, there's a line to the Burrell collection. The museum holds memories of painful lost stories. I thought, why we all go to this museum and look at this collection, which is worth billions of pounds? This is not something to be joyous about. This is something this stuff's been stolen. This stuff's been hijacked over the years. And I kind of wrote about that, and then the second line, the Macintosh rose grown, that's a relation to Charles Rennie Mackintosh, the Macintosh flower, which is one of the symbols of Glasgow, amongst many others, like the salmon and the bell from the river. So, there's a lot of real connections, a lot of real personal feelings. That's how I felt. And then I move on to the next song, What Will I Do Now? And it's basically a question to myself, what will I do now? And I'm asking myself, what am I going to do?
And you managed to articulate your feelings in an incredibly sonic and rich soundscape. Every one of these songs, they don't feel like they have a tinge of frustration or anger to them, even though that might be where you were writing the lyrics from. Musically, they take you to a slightly different place. Was that intentional?
I think my intention when I wrote this album was I want this album to connect with people. I want this album to basically, for people to listen to it and feel a connection. And so far, lots of people have said that they do feel a real strong bond. I got a nice message from a woman in America, and she said she can't stop listening to the song Final Goodbye because it just brings so many memories of
It's a beautiful song.
Of her life, and that song was written about losing somebody, and I took your hand in mine, did you close your eyes? And that's a lot of personal reflection as well. I've been with people when sadly they've passed, and you took their hand, there's a lot of, and but I didn't write it particularly from my own perspective. I wrote it from a lot of other people's perspective. How did that person feel when they lost their little dog, or when they lost their partner, or when they lost something that was really close to them? So that's how I wrote it. And I remember a friend of mine sadly lost his father, and he said, I got the chance to say goodbye to him, and I thought, wow, that's a heavy thing, that's a real emotional thing, that he was with his father when his father sadly passed. So I took a lot of emotional connection with that, and then it could be anything, So I just want the album to connect people musically. For me, on a personal level, I think that music's got to connect with you lyrically, and that's all the music I've listened to. I mean, I'm a huge John Lennon fan, and Roy Orbison's one of my all-time favourites, and those guys were really telling you how it felt, and I think that there's a connection there with if I'm not trying to put myself into the bracket of these two legends, but I'm just trying to say that if somebody somewhere can feel a connection with my music and my lyrics, I'm delighted.
I think a lot of music today feels disposable. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of music that's put out there and it goes into digital formats. And we can very, very quickly swipe. Certainly when I was growing up, you were repeated listening to the albums. Even if they didn't grab you first time, you were waiting for them to unfold. Some of the greatest songwriters that I've got in my life, like Neil Finn,
Well, yeah.
you'd hear
Incredible.
his, yeah,
Yeah.
but you'd hear some of his songs, his solo work, and it might not instantly connect, but you know that over repeat listening that it would unfold like a flower. And music doesn't seem to get that chance nowadays. I'm not even sure if full albums that are put out actually get fully heard in the way that you as an artist intend them to.
I think in many ways as well, I think the traditional, let's say the traditional music, verse, chorus, bridge, heartfelt lyrics, actually I feel part of that starting to come back in. And I'll tell you why, because I've never been a huge Instagram, TikTok person, but unfortunately that's the way the world is now. I've had to join the party. I'm a bit late to it, but I've had to do it. But what the great thing is about Instagram is, and TikTok, is that it's allowed me to find other artists. It's allowed me to find bands and also songwriters that I would never find. So there's a young guy from Glasgow that I found, a guy called Kerr Mercer. The guy is incredible. He's an incredible piano player, incredible singer, and his lyrics are fantastic. But what the good thing is about this algorithm thing is when I look at Kerr Mercer, I get maybe 5 other people of the same genre. So then I go, oh, that's a guy from, oh, there's a guy from Leeds. Oh, there's a guy from San Francisco. Oh, there's a guy from, Iceland. Doesn't matter. But then you start to realise that there is real music still out there. And there is I think music's now starting to really, for me anyway, Jamie, I think that music's starting to turn. I think that people are a bit fed up of the 3-second clips, and I think people do want a connection again.
I think it's really important that we continue to connect to music because it's such an important medium in our lives. One of the tracks, I know you said you don't specifically write about people, but the opening of side B on Prelude, you have this gorgeous My Dear Anna track. And Emma, my wife, wanted me to tell you that this just stopped her in her tracks when she listened to this. It feels like an absolutely beautiful love song. What's the background to that?
Yeah. So basically, with that song, Anna is a pseudonym. There's not a person called Anna.
Okay.
But it's as if you're writing a song for somebody and you want to tell them everything, but you never got the chance to tell them, or you didn't have the capability to tell them. And it's what your thought process is. So Anna could be somebody that you're in love with. Anna could be somebody that you have seen walking down the street, or Anna could be Emma in your instance. you know, you know. So I think, with the open line, anytime I think of you, I don't know what to do. I know that given time, you'll be just mine, my dear Anna. And that big influence was actually hugely influenced by Roy Orbison, because when you listen to like Crying by Roy Orbison, you don't know who he's crying over. Pretty Woman, you don't know who Pretty Woman is, but you know that he's trying to tell a story of somebody out there. And I think that's when I wrote My Dear Anna, I went, I want to write a kind of 50s, 60s ballad, a love song, and that's really nice that you connected with it. And I think that musically as well, there's the guitar solo as well, played by Ewan Mallock. Ewan's been in my band for many, many years, and there's a real kind of jazz tone to it as well. So it's kind of that sort of 50s, 60s kind of real heartfelt love story.
It's an absolutely gorgeous track, and I'm glad you've given me that backstory of it. And I think it's such a beautiful way that you've just articulated that track. One of the things about the digital platforms is that I can go back outside of Prelude, this vinyl that we have, and just listen to some of your other music that's out there, and gravitated to a track that was very different, or it feels very different to what you've got on Prelude, which was a track called Deep Down Inside, which just explodes with kind of an infectious club jazz energy. I absolutely love that track. That and there's a track that you have called Propaganda as well, which I really resonated with. When you are performing live, do you do a mixture of these? Or I know you've got a gig coming up at the Cottier's Theatre in Glasgow at the end of this month. Is the intention that actually this is a start again? I'm going to play the full Prelude album, or do people expect when they come and see you that some of that other stuff that you've put out there is going to be on the set list?
So I think that's really important. And basically, with the gig on the 31st of July at Cottier's, what I'll do is I will play Prelude from play every song in the album, but I will play songs from my previous releases. And the reason for that is because a lot of those songs have had the same connection with people who have bought my previous albums or people who have came to see me play live before. So, with Deep Down Inside, that's a very kind of 70s kind of acid jazz, big soulful, full-on disco sound, but people still connect with it. And the Propaganda, people still want to hear songs from that album. So I'm very fortunate. I've got a real great following, like a real solid foundation of people who have followed me on this journey for many, many years. But when I do live gigs, I've got a horn section. I've got two guitarists. I play Hammond and also play piano as well. So I definitely will play the older songs. And I think it's important because that's part of my story as well. It's part of my journey. And it's great that people love the new album. I'm honoured. But I've also got to remember that when you're playing live, people want to hear the older songs. People maybe want to dance. Maybe people have got reflection of those songs. So I think it's really, really important that I include, even my first release in 2008, Scaramanga, which, was quite a well-known jazz dance track over, all the clubs and great radio playing all that many, many years ago. I still play that to this day because that was the beginning of the journey. And I quite enjoy playing those stuff as well.
Must be fun putting that set list together then and working out the transitions between the new and the old songs. So that seems to be an art form in itself, trying to, figure out what that flow of your gig will look like. Do you spend a lot of time over that or have you got it down to fine art?
So I used to not even use set lists. Going back 10 years ago, I didn't even have set lists. I just go on stage and shout the songs out. I don't do that anymore. I'm much more structured on my approach from a production level as well. The gig's got to completely flow, and I feel much more confident with that now. I used to have a lot of free will and ad libs during gigs and all that. I used to do a lot of that, particularly because I used to do a lot of jazz festivals going back years ago, because a lot of people would say I wasn't jazz, and I wasn't jazz, but I wasn't pop either. I was kind of in between. So I still had the credibility that I could go and do a jazz festival, but I could also go and do a rock festival as well. And I think that's something which I quite enjoyed, that when I did go to the jazz festivals, I had a wee bit of room that I could free up a wee bit and kind of improvise, but I don't do anything like that now. Everything's very, very structured.
Just bringing it back to the vinyl, you clearly are an artist who loves the physical media, and you've taken a lot of care over this. Obviously, you mentioned it's been mastered at Abbey Road. And on top of that, you have this stunning artwork that I understand was commissioned by Glasgow artist Graham Gordon for the original cover painting on it. It is fascinating to look at. We talked about The Doors having a fascinating cover. This has got something that catches the eye everywhere I look. There's so many different things on this artwork. What was the hope that you wanted the listener to feel when they had this in their hand and your blue vinyl on the turntable?
Well, when the record got mastered, I thought, okay, I've had it mastered at Abbey Road, and also I got the lacquer cut at Abbey Road as well. And I thought, I want to give this album the best it deserves, and that includes the artwork as well. So there's actually a bit of a Glasgow legend, a guy called Graham Gordon, but his real name's actually Groovy Graham. that's his real name. His real name's Groovy Graham. And basically, I sat with Graham, and Graham says, "How are you feeling?" I says, "Not great, Graham." He says, "Well, tell me how you're feeling." And he's like writing things down. We're in a coffee shop, and he says, Well, what do you feel? Do you feel like do you feel that things are getting out of your control? Do you feel that, what is it you feel? What is it you feel about life? What is it? So even if, I look at the album now, Jamie, if you look at do you see the monkey on the album
Yeah,
cover? If you go to the
I
right,
do.
you see the bird with the clock.
Yeah, the little pocket watch.
Yeah, so I said to Graham, I feel that time's getting stolen from me. And he says, okay. So he came up with that
Okay.
idea. And if you look at the bottom left of the album, you see the snake.
Just poking out of that corner. Yeah, I see
And
it.
I said to Graham, I don't trust people. I don't trust people anymore. I says, everybody's a snake. So he was writing all this down. But then if you look at the piano, you see the keys are all smashed.
Yeah, that's quite a sort of eye-catching feature of this. You do have lots of exotic things, and then you've got that battered old piano in the middle. What were you feeling about that? What did he pick up on?
Well, what I said to Graham, I said, I feel like my piano's not working. I can't write. When I wrote this album, I was trying to break through to, writing songs. I couldn't do it. I felt like everything was broke. So that replicates the struggle that I had when I was in that hiatus for 7 years. That real struggle, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, everything. Totally struggled. And as I said to you before, that music is really my saviour. And I didn't have that. And it was a horrible, horrible, horrible feeling. But even if you go to, Graham says, well, what makes you happy? And if you go to the right of the album cover, do you see the wee Westie, the wee West Highland Terrier?
Little dog, yeah, the little dog.
So I've actually got a West Highland Terrier called Walt. And he says, well, we need to get the dog in there. And he said, if that makes you happy, he says, and, if you look at the album cover, you look at the monkey, and the monkey, it looks sweet. Or is it actually, is it a bit cheeky? Because when I was in Thailand, you see these monkeys everywhere. And the first day you're like, oh, they're really cute. And after a couple of days, you're like, I wish this thing would leave me alone. And then the woman as well, is that Anna? Maybe it is. Maybe that's Anna there. And it was to try and portray lots of different emotions and a lot of different feelings. But I said to Graham, I want it to be really heartfelt. And I think he has done an incredible job. Everybody said to me that they cannot believe how good the artwork is. So honestly, I think that Graham has done an incredible job, and he is an incredibly, incredibly talented artist, as well as a fantastic musician as well.
Yeah, visually, it is absolutely stunning. And now you've given me that backstory. It's like we're peeking inside your brain.
That's it. That's exactly what you're doing. Yeah.
And I think visually, this perfectly represents the sonic sound on the album as well, because the album, the songs, the way you've put them together, the soundscape, it's rich and it's vibrant, and it's got those powerful messages in there. And I think, Graham has captured what you intended absolutely perfectly. People can get hold of this. Is it on your Bandcamp? Is that where they would get a copy of this?
Yeah, you can go onto my website as well, rayharrismusic.net, and you'll get it on all my socials as well, Ray Harris Music, and yep, you'll get it in Bandcamp as well.
Yeah, perfect. And the gig coming up in Glasgow on the 31st of July, tickets still available for that? Can they get them online?
Handful of tickets left, I'm led to believe. I'm really, really looking forward to this gig. I've got some fantastic musicians, and there's a fantastic support act as well, a girl called Rue Marie, who's a fantastic folk singer. So she's going to be joining me. And I've got a few surprises for the gig, actually, because I'm going to do a couple of songs that I've never done before live. So I'm really looking forward to that.
And is there any plans over the rest of the year or going into 2027 to maybe tour outside Glasgow through the UK, or is it going to be back over to Asia?
So after the gig, I'll be going straight back to Bangkok in Thailand. I'll be spending a bit of time out there. So I'm away then, and then I'll come back, and I'm actually going to be doing a live album. So the gig is actually getting recorded live, and then I'll mix the live album with Robby, get it mastered, and then I'll probably start doing a tour of spring 2027. I'll be going back to Asia in January for a bit of time, And then hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be doing a tour April, May 2027.
Brilliant. Well, hopefully Leeds is on that
It's a fantastic
UK
city.
tour.
Love it.
Yeah. Ray, thank you so much for bringing your story, the Doors' Strange Days album, and your own phenomenal songs to Friday Vinyl Club today. Did you enjoy that?
Jamie, thank you so much for having me on the pod. And I think the pod's fantastic. And you've had some amazing artists on it. And I'm honestly privileged that you've asked me to come and join you. So thank you so much. And thanks very much to all your listeners for tuning in.
Thank you. It's always amazing to hear how music flows through our lives, especially from someone who is both an incredible music lover and music maker. To our listeners, you can find some of Ray's tracks along with our favourite tracks from Strange Days over on our companion Spotify playlist. All the links will be in the show notes. If you want to get in touch and contact us directly, you can on Instagram at JamieB1973 or drop us an email at thefridayvinylclub@hotmail.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow, share it with a friend, or leave us a rating. It really helps a small family independent podcast find new people within the podcast community. Until next time, keep your records spinning and your stories alive. Thanks, Ray. Really appreciate that.
Thanks, Jamie.
Cheers. Bye.